What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Quantum Resistant Ledger channel, your video portal into the world of post-quantum digital asset security. I am here with Strike. I am Ryan, the co-host here today. I'm the director of advocacy at the QRL. Strike on this side of me over here is our director of outreach. Today, getting really close to the end of the year. So with that being said, today's episode is all about quantum predictions as we head into the new year and beyond. Not only are we going to cover the quantum predictions coming up, but we're also going to be discussing some of the recent news and surrounding quantum supremacy. We're going to be talking a little bit about Bitcoin, and make sure you stay around to the end. We're going to be doing a little Quanta contest for the holidays. Awesome. Well, first off, so just to cover an outline, so when you're watching at home, you kind of know where we're kind of starting out with, and we're going to dive into.
Don't grill me too hard, though, okay?
Yeah. Before we dive into quantum predictions and supremacy, with it being very top of mind for a lot of people right now, I would love to just dive in briefly for a few minutes as an opener. I'd love to dive into Bitcoin for a little bit. With it last week, I think BTC hitting an all-time high. Market cap today is somewhere, probably when you're watching this, it might have fluctuated a little bit. It's around 436 billion. And I just want to know, Strike, what are your thoughts on the current state of where Bitcoin is headed in 2021? What are your thoughts on it? How do you think this affects the overall industry as a whole? And I just want to kind of hear your thoughts on this. Go back and forth briefly on this.
Yeah, sure. So it's hard to be on any crypto project nowadays and not talk about Bitcoin. In a lot of ways, Bitcoin is the crypto world reserve currency, right? It's the tide in a lot of ways that keeps buoyancy to all the other ships. So, and if you're talking about Bitcoin, especially this month, it's almost impossible not to talk about the price. So I'm going to prefix with the standard. None of this is financial advice. This is my opinions. But let's do this. So, okay. A lot of us probably remember the bull run from 2017. I mean, if you're following crypto Twitter, there's a lot of evidence right now that much of this 2020 price movement is coming from institutional buying and from people looking for hedges against unprecedented currency debasement, stimulus package. All of these things are things that provide buoyancy to cryptocurrencies as hedges. And we know this because some of them are going public. Some of the companies are going public. They're replacing some of their corporate reserve currencies on hand cash with Bitcoin. In fact, just yesterday, Michael Saylor, who leads the investment firm MicroStrategy, and he's been purchasing hundreds of $1 million in Bitcoin. Of course, you only ever find out after the fact that he had purchased. He recommended Elon Musk yesterday that he do the same thing on Twitter. To which Elon asked, is this possible? Presumably asking whether or not there was enough liquidity in the space in order to make those sizes of purchases without being the market maker yourself and driving the price up. And essentially driving the price up since you're buying so much and increasing the cost of your own Bitcoin. So Mr. Saylor, Mike, offered to show him his playbook. So, I mean, you're seeing more institutional interest, and this is a good thing. It doesn't feel like 2017 to me. To me, that was a lot of retail buying, a lot of FOMO. This feels fundamentally different. All the talk of tulip bulbs, has stopped. As we know, tulip bulbs never recovered. But there are still a lot of diehard precious metal bugs. The most of which, one of the most well-known is probably going to be Peter Schiff. He's probably one of the most outspoken anti-Bitcoin voices in Twitter. Peter's well known for a lot of years now. He's an eternal pessimist as far as the state of the economy. I followed him for many years. he's anti-Bitcoin for sure, but I think what actually happens is he does own Bitcoin. His son Spencer Schiff is a strong verbal supporter of Bitcoin, and with the banter between Peter and his son back and forth on Bitcoin, and this is all over Twitter, memes galore. Bitcoin, it makes up, I don't know, like 70 to 80% of his feed. If you want to talk about Bitcoin, you go on to anti-Bitcoin's, Bitcoin's worst enemy. So my suspicion is that even he does own Bitcoin, and he's using that as a springboard in order to remain relevant.
Yeah, and another point to add on top of that, as far as your comments on debasement and things of that nature, it's like it's kind of a perfect storm in a sense as well. Of if like even if you just go and look at the most recent M2 with the money supply, if you look at how much fiat money has been getting put into the system, and you think of the long-term effects that is going to be played downstream, it kind of that adds to it as well, as far as how the climate might look a few years from now. So it's like, to add to another part where you were just mentioning, with Sailor or more institutional money that's going to be going into it. Another part that's really important to mention is if you think about Bitcoin as an asset class, once it starts getting higher and higher market cap wise, a lot of these bigger, whether it's pension funds, if it's sovereign wealth funds, over time it's going to become much more attractive to them, because when they're pouring in hundreds of millions of dollars, it's going to be a lot easier for them to be able to make that decision on behalf of their LPs, and putting that money into Bitcoin as an actual serious move, where they think that it can actually offer value down the road as a store of value, and not just just only a hedge. So that's a really important part to mention as well.
That's a good point. Let me add a couple things into that because I like where you're going with it. So back in 2017, there was all this FOMO, right? We hit 19,000, close to 20,000 highs, right? Bitcoin was all over the news. It was all over Google. In fact, what I'll do is, if you look at Bitcoin's search, if you look under the trends of Bitcoin, of Google, to see where Bitcoin is on the search patterns, it's just a little bump, whereas 2017 is all the way up here. This just recently took a little bit. We're at new all-time highs, approaching 24, 25,000, in cryptocurrency. And if you look around, there's nothing on mainstream news anywhere. It still feels very, very like it hasn't, like it's still under the radar. It hasn't, which is incredible to me. So for I have the Google Edge search chart. Maybe future Ryan can just overlay it like right up here somewhere, but it shows the interest based on Google searches, and I use that as kind of a metric to gauge how interested people are in different things. So my opinion, so going higher, yeah, I think Bitcoin's going higher, which also improves the use case for QRL as a hedge, against Y2K quantum threat. If you look at two of the most bullish models for Bitcoin, which are two of the most exciting, you've got Plan B's stock to flow model, which puts Bitcoin at 100K by the end of 2021, and you have he's pseudo anonymous, but he's pretty well known on Twitter. And you also have a Citibank analyst went public with putting Bitcoin potentially at 300K USD by the end of December 2021. Now, granted, these are very optimistic models. Do I think that they'll reach these levels? I don't know, but this is crypto. Anything can happen. Bitcoin going up? Yeah, Bitcoin's going up. It's shown resiliency against being a bubble, and unprecedented institutional players are now using third parties like Coinbase in order to accumulate under the radar. They're not just buying on the open market. They have to be smart about this. Throwing the Fed, to your point, is essentially with the currency debasement and essentially socializing the private sector through open market purchases. This is the amount of stimulus and currency is unprecedented in human history. Now we have the, what was it, 900 billion stimulus package coming out.
Yeah, 900 today or yesterday.
All of these provide buoyancy for the use case for crypto and Bitcoin in general.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's kind of a perfect segue into our next topic, which is talking about quantum supremacy. I know that we're going to be diving into some predictions and go a little bit more in depth there. But when it comes to quantum supremacy, probably most of us, and if you haven't heard the news yet, we'll be filling you in on this as kind of a macro overview of what occurred. China recently, a few weeks ago, earlier in December, has stated that they have quantum supremacy. And so, what I want to ask you, Strike, is with their case of what happened a few weeks ago, is this a one task type simulation, or is this something that is a bigger step that we should really take notice of? So is it, one task type simulation, or is it a bit more, hey, this is something that actually could be programmable? So I want to get your take on more of a technical level of, is it more serious, or is it like, okay, I can just kind of do one thing. It's not anywhere near real life application yet.
Yeah. So China's announcement was a little unexpected, and it was also interesting. I think they actually used the term quantum advantage over quantum supremacy this time. I could be mistaken, but they put together what's it's an optical boson sampling quantum computer, and I think this is good news for the industry, mostly in that it shows continued innovation in the field, right? No one's saying that this machine's going to break the internet or break encryption or steal from the Federal Reserve, anything like that. But I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it. They were able to perform a function that might have practical applications in the future of solving some problems that are essentially impossible for classical computers to do. But it is a very specialized use case what they did do for boson sampling. It's not the template for a universal quantum computer, which as we know, is the holy grail, I suppose, of computing. And its history, history repeats itself. Researchers at IBM and a few others came out with contrary narratives and different sides to the same story, as to what China had done. So there's still a lot of controversy, that exists in the field, and I think that it'll stay that way. But with that being said, a powerful takeaway is that we are getting better and better at the manipulation of single photons, particles of light, which are very good stepping stones for future advancements in quantum computing, not just for quantum secure communications, but also for different flavors of optical quantum computing. So these are, to me, these feel like organic stepping stones. All right. So far, ion trap machines seem to be the most universally accepted machine, but there's also other types, that are on the radar. But so far I think ionic traps are the most well-known, popular, and promising. And other flavors of photonic quantum computers are under the radar and a bit less known because there's very little information about them. But as with all things, time will tell.
No, I appreciate it. Kind of diving into the second part of this, and I want to kind of break it up into, I was just thinking about this. I want to break it up into a few sections because I think we can kind of get a better answer that's a little bit more clear. So we'll break it up into, we'll talk about funding, what quantum volume is, and then talk a little bit about some resources for people to kind of go further down the rabbit hole. So I want to start out with funding. So there's a lot of money getting put into the space around quantum computing, people trying to solve the problem, getting ahead. What I want to ask is, where do you see over the next 18 or 12 to 18 months, where do you see prediction wise, where do you see a lot of money entering the space, in your opinion?
Sure. In my opinion, I think we'll continue to see more corporate capital, more government funding. Companies are starting to look for specific use cases in which quantum computers could give them a strategic advantage. As the number of qubits grows, the error rates from systemic noise start to drop. Better algorithms are developed. Possibly even through the use of AI. I think that's a tremendous opportunity for the future. AI teaching quantum computers how to solve certain problems. I mean, this is a real this is a really exciting field, and I think that specifically is inevitable. But manufacturing processes that improve their, improving that quality. I think all of these are coming together to show continued progress, and it's going to, it's going to allow other investors and more investors to become involved in the field. Right now, it's still, right now there's still a lot of speculation, a lot of confusion. We don't have a universal quantum computer yet. I think thermodynamics and dilution refrigeration, I think those are pretty close to as good as they're going to get. So the systemic noise problems would have to be solved some other way. But I honestly believe that they'll get past these. So I don't think there's any more innovation in that area, but governments, venture capitalists, private money. Though I think that that's only going to increase from here. In January, the U.S., for example, in January, the U.S. Department of Energy announced the National Quantum Initiative, which put $625 million of funds over the next 5 years to establish, I think they said 2 to 5 multidisciplinary quantum information science research centers. I'm not going to say that again. Other countries, corporations, and venture capitalists are doing the same. So everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. It was kind of a broad question. I just kind of wanted to see where you were thinking kind of, lane wise, where it would be, or whether it's, several lanes. But moving on from that one, let's talk about QV, or, quantum volume. So essentially, I know, the main components, number of qubits, error rate, connectivity of qubits. Can you dive in and explain much better than I just did of what is QV? And if we had to break it down for someone that maybe is either new to hearing about it, or maybe even someone that has a little bit more of an understanding, what's QV, Strike?
Yeah. So if you're new to QV, QV is IBM's way of measuring the performance of a quantum processor. Back in the day, we had 100 megahertz, 200 megahertz, I'm dating myself. Let's say gigahertz, 1 gigahertz, 2 gigahertz. And eventually they came out with multi-core processors. And so it wasn't just the speed. You also had additional instruction sets, MMX instruction set. There were so many different factors. Same thing exists with quantum computers, except I would say that there's many, many more variables. So what IBM did is they did this because a transistor from a classical machine and a qubit machine have pretty much nothing in common as far as how they work. The quantum volume protocol takes a series of variables into consideration and just gives you an integer which represents quantum volume. Integer might be like, this quantum processor has a QV of 64 or 128. And what it tries to do is speak to the quality of the qubits. So the more quantum volume that you have, the more complex problems you can solve. If you're interested in what makes up quantum volume, there's a bunch of different metrics: error calibration, circuit optimization, gate fidelity, crosstalk errors, decoherence times. These are all things that make up QV. So I'm not an expert on the QV topic per se, but it's probably one of the best metrics that we have right now in order to at least get a rough gauge as to the performance of a machine. But like anything, data can be manipulated, right? So may start. I suspect next year, another prediction. I suspect next year you'll start seeing quantum computers come out with astronomical quantum volume statements. And that will all be based around being able to, I suppose, manipulate the metrics of the algorithm in order to goal seek the quantum volume number that you want in order to make the news, in order to keep people and shareholders happy. I think that's something that will come up quite a bit next year.
Yeah, that leads into my next question, which is another one that kind of, we were talking, on Bitcoin of, no one can predict the future as far as what it will exactly look like down the road. But speaking of QV and some of these projects and, them making a lot of progress, I just want to ask you, this is not to say this is anything that's going to be set in stone, but what are some projects, some of the bold projects in the space, from your Honeywells, your IBMs, your D-Waves, your Google? First off, where are they at now, and where do you see them heading through 2021 and beyond? You can either pick out one or two of them if you want to highlight those, or just maybe a few where you think, hey, they're going to be making quite a bit of progress these next 6 to 12 months.
So, I mean, the major players we know about, IBM, Honeywell, IonQ. These are relatively transparent projects. Um, I mean, we've talked about this before. Honeywell aims to have a quantum volume of, I think it was 640,000 within the next 4.5 years as they scale up their ion traps, um, which is powerful. IBM's getting IBM's now getting into manufacturing its own dilution refrigerators because they're finding that commercial refrigerators and off the shelf parts aren't quite cutting it. You can't exactly get one at Best Buy, right? So I think when you have large companies such as these, far-reaching forecasts should be taken a little bit with a grain of salt because progress in the lab is really just one component of the press release. I mean, you know, corporations need to show progress for various reasons. And sometimes when you throw progress out for a number of years in the past, how many people actually look back and and critique what was said 5 years ago? So I take a lot of that with a grain of salt. To me, it's really the biggest questions to me are really the stuff that we don't know. who's
Yeah.
who's making the progress that we don't know about? And there are 100 reasons I can think of in which great strides in quantum computing, why that information
Wouldn't be
would be kept
shared. Yeah.
secret.
Yeah. Kind of in closing on this part, at least before we dive into, the little Quantsec contest that we're going to have, is I want to ask you, and this kind of is really important with us starting out today's episode. We're talking about Bitcoin, us diving into quantum supremacy, some talk there, and just on, some of the more technical aspects. But one of the most, a common theme and why this matters is that as more and more both capital and interest is being put into the space, with all of that, capital and importance of people putting their precious money, and not only that, just resources and a lot more going into the space. One part I want to talk about is that it's really important for people to get a better baseline understanding of the quantum threat in general, for being able to understand it better. Why should they even care? So what I want to ask Strike is, over the holidays, or if you're watching this after the holidays, I want to ask Strike, what are a few next steps or recommendations you have for people, whether it be books, resources, articles, that someone can take a few hours of time and get a little bit of better understanding of the quantum threat, so that they're more in the know now, so that in order to be prepared for later, they're a more informed citizen now, and they can have that with them moving forward as the crypto industry grows over this next decade.
Yeah. So myself personally, I started off with the fundamentals, from turn of the century with Einstein and Bohr's, the early physicists. But I understand not everyone wants to take that route. If you really just want to keep up to date on the news, subscribing to Google Trends with certain keywords is a really good thing. I do that. Also, I'll give a shout out to quantumcomputingreport.com. They send out news automatically to your email address. They've got a good newsletter. And if you want to do a little bit more research in quantum mechanics and other areas, I gotta give a shout out to Matt O'Dowd of Space Time on PBS. He's got a really interesting show that I just love. It's probably one of my favorites. But specifically, just to get where quantum computers are at, I'm going to say obviously this channel, like and subscribe, and quantumcomputingreport.com, and also Google Trends with keywords in order to get them sent to your mailbox. Those are good places to start. There's also some Discord groups that are available where they talk specifically just about quantum theory, quantum computer programming, and quantum computers. And then there's the old-fashioned DYIR. So, or do your own research.
Yeah,
DYOR.
no, I appreciate it. What I want to do now, I appreciate Strike diving into a few of those areas. What we want to do now is, since we've been talking for a little bit about quantum predictions on our side, kind of what we're seeing in the industry as a whole, internally on our team. What we want to do is we want to be able to hear from you to see what do you think is going to be happening over the next 12 to 18 months with your quantum predictions. So we're going to be running a little bit of a QRL contest, so to speak. And the rules are super easy. There's 3 steps for it. First one will just be if you want to be involved in the contest to win potentially 500 Quanta. Number 1 is subscribe to our channel. That way you can listen and be informed whenever Strike and myself come out with a new video content that is pertaining to not only the crypto industry as a whole, but also just on the quantum threat as we dive into that each week. So first part is make sure you subscribe to the channel if you've already done this. The second step is the most important. We want you to write a comment below this video on YouTube. Tell us in a few sentences or less. Let us know what you think your prediction is of the quantum threat moving forward. Share as little or as much as you want. And then third, so we can associate your comment to who you actually are, place either your Discord or your Twitter handle alongside with that, with your comment, so that we can associate the two. And over this next week, over the holidays, we will be putting together, picking winners for each of those based on the comments. And we just, not only do we want to run a little fun little QRL contest amongst the whole community, but we also just want to see what your thoughts are, and then we can help incorporate in what you think on the quantum threat moving forward. We can cover this in future episodes. That way the community is involved. But Strike, again, I appreciate you taking the time to answer some of these questions. You thanks. At home, if you are watching this throughout the holidays or not, have a great time heading into the new year. If you're watching this after, hope your holidays were great. And from Strike and I, we will both see you in the next video. And you keep your digital assets safe and secure. And Strike and I will see you soon.